Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some swaps to it to take that list to the next level. This week, it's Spellslinger time. Mizzet Parun costs 6 mana, that's triple blue and triple red. Oof, but the mana cost is totally worth it. He's a 5/5 dragon wizard that cannot be countered, he flies, and he's got his classic ability. Whenever you draw a card, he deals a damage to whatever you want. And, best of all, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. Which of course means you deal the damage. That's right, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, not just you. That's legit. With an ability like that, it's no wonder he's so popular. Full disclosure, I'm a graveyard player, so I don't even know how to play Magic without sacrificing my own creatures and reanimating them. So this'll be fun. His page definitely helps me figure it out though. You cast spells, you draw cards, you deal damage. Spellslinger to infinity and beyond. And infinity is actually an interesting word to use here. Mizzet has 3 different cards among his signature spells that go quote-unquote infinite with his ability. You draw a card and deal a damage, and since you've dealt a damage, you draw a card. Curiosity Niv is a well-known combo, and 64% of players are using that combo, with exactly half using Ophidian Eye as backup. Only 40% of players are using Tandem Lookout, possibly owing to the fact that Tandem does not say may. At first, this reads like it might kill you. Niv's combo is only infinite insofar as it will deal damage equal to the number of cards left in your deck. If you're not dealing lethal damage that way, or finding some other way to interrupt said combo, you deck out by drawing all your cards. Luckily, this combo provides its own out. To make sure you don't deck yourself, you can just deal the damage to Niv himself or to the Lookout so you won't draw any cards unless you absolutely want to. We haven't even gotten to the average deck list yet, and this is already a tricky place to start because there are a lot of players out there who don't really enjoy 2-card combos with a commander. And while we could just take those combo pieces out of the list and then carry on, that's not really how this deck works. When you're building a Spellslinger deck, like Niv Mizzet, you really need to have a good idea of what your win conditions will be as you're building it, because that will have ripple effects on the way that you build the rest of the deck. I'm going to keep these combo cards because they are on average more popular for Niv Mizzet, but also because I consider them an indelible aspect to his history and his appeal. And frankly, it's an Izzet Spellslinger deck. How else is it planning to win? Combat damage? We don't exactly have overwhelming stampedes running around in this color combination. This will shape how I plan to modify the rest of the deck, but up front, my plan is not to zoom right towards these combos. If they happen, so we deal. But if not, let's find some other ways to make Niv Mizzet lethal. Alright, let's get Niv's average deck list and plug it into Architect. Remember, any changes we make will either be cost neutral or will lower the overall price of the list. First things first, I have to praise a lot about this average list. Niv Mizzet has one of the most restrictive mana costs I've ever seen, and just look at this mana base. There's only one colorless land, Reliquary Tower, which helps keep all the cards that Niv will draw. Folks know better than to use colorless mana sources because they won't help cast Niv. His mana rocks also don't provide colorless mana, except for, of course, Sol Ring, but, that's because, well, Sol Ring. That said, let's make some improvements. There are 3 categories that I want to tackle here. Win conditions, non-spells, and interaction. I want to start by ruminating on the deck's win conditions, because that will guide how we plan to brew the rest of the deck. We've already seen the Curiosity combo, but what do the other routes to victory include? The original list contains some good hints. Thousand Year Storm, the Locust God, Psychosis Crawler, another Niv Mizzet, Laboratory Maniac, Gutter Snipe effects, and Ral Storm Conduit. These all go in different directions. Labman, for example, leans into our combo of drawing our entire deck. Ral goes for combo too, since he can go infinite by repeatedly having a copy spell copy itself to deal infinite damage. Meanwhile, Locust God and Psychosis Crawler ask us to make Niv a bit more wheelie. Contrasted to wheels, Gutter Snipe can ping enemies to death by spamming cantrips. And finally, Thousand Year Storm is, of course, a storm card. We wouldn't just be getting generic value from a card like this. It's the kind of thing that makes us go off by building up for one very big turn. Picking win conditions is important because there are a lot of cards that we'd want to include to help support those various paths. For example, if we like Ral, more copy effects would be called for, potentially including the famous Dramatic Reversal combo. If we build Storm, well then Aetherflux and Swarm Intelligence feel like they'd belong too, along with effects like Bonus Round. Unfortunately, we don't have room for all of these, so I'm going to pick the win conditions that I feel have the most synergy with the bulk of what's already going on in the average deck list. In short, I'm cutting Ral and Thousand Year Storm. I'd like to hone the deck's payoffs on the act of casting spells and the act of drawing cards, rather than adding in pieces for copy combo or building up towards a big storm turn. I just think they'd make us change the deck a little bit too much from what we already have. While I'm here, I'm going to cut Firemind's Research as well. This seems like way too much mana to pay for either of these effects. This means we're keeping the Curiosity combo with Labman to back it up, just in case it's not completely lethal, some win cons that pay us off every time we draw a card, and some on-cast damage effects. This is great because it helps us figure out which cards to include going forward. Since we know drawing cards gives us this many payoffs, we know we can add in a few more budget-friendly wheel effects to make them even more potent. These are my favorites. Molten Psyche, Time Reversal, Corvat's Fury. Collective Defiance puts in nice work for a low mana cost. I've also kind of always wanted to try out Midnight Clock, just because. Wheel effects can be expensive, so upgrade these to your tastes. But I think that Niv will be happy having a cheap effect that can fill up his hand and deal a lot of damage, and I think his other win conditions hiding in the deck will be happy about that too. Additionally, since we know we have the Curiosity combo, Elixir of Immortality is a must, because we can't rely on Labman alone for backup. We have Gutter Snipe and Electrostatic Field effects too, which may look like they don't do a ton, but they definitely add up, especially with all of the 1 and 2 mana cards we've got going on here. I'll add in their sister Firebrand Archer to join the fight too. You know what, I'll include one more here, Mizzet's Mastery, which can copy and then recast all the spells in our graveyard. If we land this, even with just a small number of spells in the yard, it will trigger Niv Mizzet a bunch of times, as well as our Gutter Snipe effects. And if we have any number of wheel spells in the yard, that's even more damage to fly around. This is a great win condition as long as we time it correctly. Already, this feels sweet. By honing our win conditions, we've already helped guide the direction of the rest of the deck. Whew. That was just section 1. Let's hope this gets easier moving forward. Now we're moving to section 2, the non-spells. Yes, when you cast any card, it's technically a spell, but I'm talking about the instants and sorceries. There are too many non-instant and non-sorcery cards in the deck. Niv needs proper spells to draw cards and keep the engine going. And actually, to begin this section, I'm going to make what might be the most egregious cut of all. I'm cutting the spell cost reducers. Electromancer, Baral, and Primal Amulet. Hear me out, hear me out, hear me out. I have a good reason. It's because of math. These are staples of the spellslinger genre. What am I thinking, right? But let's crunch the numbers. How many spells in the deck did these actually reduce the cost of? By my count, they only reduced the cost of 19 cards in the average deck list. That means they reduced the cost of less than a fifth of the cards in the deck, and that's just not good enough for me. Compare them to cards like Sapphire Medallion. That would help reduce the cost of 25 cards in the original average deck, and would even help us reduce future command tax off Niv Mizzet. But I'm not going to advise running that one here either. It's just not a big enough chunk of the deck that would get a good reduction. If your spell count varies from this average list, then those are totally cool effects to include. But our average deck list here already has so many one-drop spells or double-pipped spells that these cards are mostly duds. Even flipping the Wellspring doesn't feel truly impactful when we're using that mana to double up just like a random opt. And you know what, while I'm here, I'm also going to take out Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse. Unless you're playing Landfall or Top Deck Manipulation, don't use these in 2-color decks. Why? They fix your colors, right? The end result is that you get a tapped land that taps for one of your colors. Okay, but we could also just play like a Guildgate. The end result is a tapped land that gets you both of your colors. So I'm gonna chop these. Alright, let's look again at those creatures. You may have noticed I didn't include any of the token makers, or even the card Crackling Drake in the discussion about win conditions. And that's just because I don't view them as honestly viable win conditions. Crackling Drake can get big, but attacking one opponent for 10 or even 15 is just a slow proposition compared to the explosive potential of our other win condition options. And the token makers are really no better. They function better as blockers than a proper army to swarm our opponents for lethal damage. The exceptions, of course, being Locust God and really even Ominous Seas. The 8/8s are harder to acquire, but that synergizes with our increased wheel count, and an 8/8 is way better at dealing lethal damage than a 1/1 bird. Heck, a 1/1 bird isn't even going to do as much damage to our opponents as that Electrostatic Field. And if the tokens are instead intended to be our defense, well, it's still kind of lackluster. I think we have better choices to defend ourselves. Which leads us nicely to our next topic, interaction. One of the biggest mistakes we can make with this deck is building with the idea that Niv will remain in play consistently. His reputation precedes him. He's not going to remain in play unless we make sure of it. When people see Niv, they want him gone because that combo is so well renowned. We can't play him willy-nilly. We got to time it just right. And that means that we also have to provide meaningful interaction with our opponent's threats and their removal spells, both before Niv hits play and definitely afterwards as well. So we should avoid any cards that only really work well with Niv in play. I love the interaction between Niv Mizzet and Basilisk Collar, and in fact, I bet many folks will swear by this epic combo to death touch ping enemy creatures to death. but I hesitate to make that an official recommendation because I think it might be a little too win more, only helping us out when we're already in a favorable position. I will make an exception to that rule, however, and that's with the card Polymorphist's Jest. This turns all enemy creatures into 1/1s, and it's also a spell that triggers Niv. We can cast this, draw a card, ping a creature for 1 damage, and then turn that creature into a 1/1, at which point it's already been dealt lethal damage. Plus, this card is really good even if Niv Mizzet isn't in play. It's just really spicy when he is, too, so I like this addition here. I also want to add in a few more pinpoint removal spells. Apparently Pongify is like nearly $5, which is just whoa, but Rapid Hybridization and Reality Shift are still cheaper, and they're very meaningful forms of removal. Alongside this, though, I have to take out what I perceive to be a pretty weak removal spell, Mizzet Mortars. 6 mana at sorcery speed to kill some of the stuff in play? Thank you, but next. So that's some enemy interaction, but what about us? What about protecting Niv Mizzet? That's ultra important. He's the deck's primary engine. But I need to pause and note the distinct absence of cards that we would typically associate with protecting our commanders. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots do not appear in the original average deck list. This is an intentional absence. Niv is a linchpin to the deck strategy, but those protective cards are missing. I see you, Niv Mizzet players. I see what you're up to here. You know that it's important for Niv's interactive spells to be actual instants and sorceries. It's never bad to give Niv Mizzet hexproof, of course, but when Niv turns all of your counter spells into dismisses that also ping something, that's a darn good thing to capitalize on. So most of his protection should take the form of spells. This makes me turn my attention to some pricey cards in the list, though. The new cards Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting Swat are primo protection for Niv. Play them if you've got them. Given their price, though, I'd actually like to swap them for some more budget-friendly replacements. Stubborn Denial is a 1-mana negate as long as we have Niv in play. And let's face it, the spells we'll want to counter are the spells that would attempt to remove our commander. And the same goes for the card Bolt Bend. 1 mana to redirect that Swords to Plowshares away from our commander and point it at someone else's. Chef's kiss. The next most expensive card in the deck is Mystical Tutor. Great card, but it's nearing $20. We have a bunch of wheels anyway, so we'll draw so many cards that we'll be fine without a $20 tutor. I lingered for a while on whether or not to cut Blue Sun Zenith from the list too. It's just big and clunky in a deck where the commander draws us 1 card regardless of whether our instants cost 1 mana or 10. It sounds rad to draw 7 cards and have Niv blaze for 7. But again, I don't want to evaluate the card based on whether Niv is in play. If he's not in play, this can help us catch up on cards, but again, that's a lot of mana to draw cards when we have a bunch of wheels and cantrips already. Plus, that triple blue is really hard on the mana. I'd rather play a Stroke of Genius, and I don't think I really want to play Stroke of Genius. Yeah, let's cut this. The original average list doesn't even include Mystic Confluence, despite it being much more affordable these days. And I think that's an important signal that we have to be hyper-conscious of our mana curve and stick to spells with very low mana costs. All of this being said, I'm about to recommend a card that breaks every single one of the rules that I just talked about. It is a creature card with a decently high mana cost, and a pretty restrictive one at that. And on top of it, it's probably a completely win more card, but I don't care. I just love him so much. Gimli, lend us your axe. I want to play Torbran here, y'all. Make Niv ping for 3 instead of 1. Play an opt, deal a total of 6 damage to anything. It just sounds delicious. Wheel 5 cards, deal 15 is just woof. Curiosity combo now deals 3 times as much damage, so we barely need to worry about whether the number of cards left in our library will be lethal. Even if Niv isn't in play, Gutter Snipe jumps to 4 damage instead of 2. Locust God Swarms become much more dangerous. I know, this is silly. But this kind of hilarity is just what I absolutely love about Commander. That leaves us with the final list. You can find a link for the deck list in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. So let me know what you think of these cuts and swaps in the comments below, as well as any other suggestions that you have for your fellow brewers for cards that will help take Niv to the next level. Thanks so much for watching.